Good morning. My name is Michael Puckett. I'm a Covenant Seminary student here at Covenant, and I am excited to be teaching God's Word to you guys this morning in Ecclesiastes 9, 1 through 10. That's page 557 in your ESV Bible. But to begin, I want to kind of open up my heart with you guys a little bit. I've been wrestling with this idea of death, and this has been something that's been heavy on my heart and heavy on my family. On May 19, 2016, I was in Cocoa Beach, Florida, taking a nap at a beach house, and my phone rang. And I saw that it was my sister calling, and immediately I was like, I'm taking a nap, so I'm just gonna ignore it, and then I'll call her back later. Well, the phone rang again, and when phones ring 2 times, you kind of immediately begin to kind of feel like something might not be right. But I was in the middle of a nap, so I was like, I'll just let that go. I'm not going to answer the phone call. But it wasn't until I got a text message immediately after the second call from my sister that said, it's an emergency, get mom and dad. So I got up from my nap, ran upstairs to my mom and dad's bedroom, and I said, Mom, Dad, what's going on? And I looked and I saw my dad's face as he was on the phone with my uncle, who was telling my dad that my grandma, we call her Panna, was on her way to the hospital. She lives in Orlando, Florida, 45 minutes east of Cocoa Beach, Florida, and so we all immediately jumped in the car and drove all the way down to the hospital. And as we were driving to the hospital, I could just feel this feeling inside of me like, is this it? Is this the last moment with my grandma? And you see, my grandma, she's a champion. She's 77 years old. She's spunky. She has fight. She takes care of herself. She does her own grocery shopping. She has her own house. She's very independent. She drives everyone to Bible study. I mean, she's a go-getter. And my grandma several times have been in and out of the hospital, and she had surgery. She fought breast cancer and survived. And so in my head, I'm like, Panna doesn't die. She's invincible. She's superwoman. There's no way, nothing can take her down. So part of me is going, you know what? She's probably just going to need, some surgery and be able to come right back and be just right back to normal. That's kind of how my grandma was. But it wasn't until we got to the hospital and you walk into the room that you never want to walk into with the crosses and the Bibles and the chaplain. And my family sat down in that room and we were told the news that my grandma had cardiac failure at her house at 5 p.m. on May 19, 2016. It was just a few of my family members there, some of my brothers and sisters, and we began to cry and weep together over the loss of my grandma. And then my brother and I were invited to go into the room next door where my grandma was to see her and say goodbye to her. So we walked next door, and I remember seeing my grandma and thinking, what in the world is going on? Here's this lady that had so much fight in her, so much life in her. It seemed to have so much meaning and so much purpose, but yet here she lays, gone. Just a shell of herself, lifeless. Death makes you feel meaningless, makes life feel meaningless. In Ecclesiastes 9, 1 through 10, we're put in this position of death, and we have to stare it in the face. We have a major problem as human beings. Our big problem is that we are going to die, and we tend to live in fear of death. Now, the preacher in Ecclesiastes 9 is writing to God's people who are fully aware of death just like we are today. This is not something new to them. Death has permeated our society since Adam's rebellion and is still prevalent today just like it was prevalent in the days of the preacher. In the days from beginning to now, death has been prevalent since Adam rebelled. So this is where we sit in Ecclesiastes 9, 1 through 10, with the preacher talking about death. And the main point that I want you to get away from this sermon this morning, the big idea, is live with joy. 1, because God holds you in his hand, and 2, because God gives you life. So first, God holds you in his hand. Let's look at verse 1. Ecclesiastes 9, verse 1. But all this I lay to heart, examining it all, how the righteous and the wise and their deeds are in the hand of God. Whether it is love or hate, man does not know. Both are before him. When you look at this first verse, you may be thinking in your head, all right, so what is he talking about? And so he kind of brings in this idea that all are in the hand of God. He's emphasizing that all are in God's hand. And what he's trying to draw upon is this illusion of the hand. And so when we think of hand, we think of our physical palms. You hold them up, you see them. All right, we're thinking hand, 5 fingers, okay? But when they were thinking hand in Israel's time, when the preacher was writing to God's people, they were thinking the tool that you use to make money, to work, the tool that you use to hold a sword and to conquer cities. It was a powerful symbol. And so when it says God's hand and that we are in God's hand, the emphasis is that you are in God's control, God's power, God's authority. So all people, whether good, bad, wicked, evil, are in God's hand, are under God's control and power. Now let's look at verses 2 through 6. I'm going to read them to you as it continues. In this, the same for all, since the same even happens to the righteous and the wicked, to the good and the evil, to the clean and the unclean, to him who sacrifices and him who does not sacrifice. As the good one is, so is the sinner. And he who swears is he who shuns an oath. This is an evil in all that is done under the sun, that the same event happens to all. Also the hearts of the children of man are full of evil, and madness is in their hearts while they live and after they go to the dead. But he who is joined with all the living has hope. For a living dog is better than a dead lion. For the living know that they will die, but the dead know nothing, and they have no more reward, for the memory of them is forgotten. Their love and their hate and their envy have already perished, and forever they have no more share in all that is done under the sun. Real brief note, under the sun for you guys is kind of the idea that what happens here on earth. So there's this idea of a heavenly realm, an earthly realm, and when the preacher is saying under the sun, he's talking about what is taking place on earth, okay? Underneath the sun, quite literally. But to begin looking at verses 2 through 3, we see that everyone dies. And so the preacher is stretching out this tension here, this tension of the fact that if you're good, you die. If you're bad, you die. If you're wicked, you die. If you're righteous, you die. If you're rich, you die. If you're intelligent, you die. This whole idea, the whole spectrum, every human being, the president of the United States is going to die just like you and I. And it's in this reality of death that the preacher is pushing in onto the meaning of life, that he's pushing in on, so what? How do we live if we all are going to die? Does it even matter to be good? Does it even matter to be a Christian? Does it? If the ultimate destination is the grave? I love what the preacher, though, points out, is that death is an intruder. Death is evil. He labels it as evil. This event that happens to all people is evil, is in opposition to God. You see, in the beginning, when Adam sinned, when he rebelled against God's commands to not eat of the tree, when that happened, there was an intrusion of sin, wickedness, and evil. Something came in that didn't belong there. It's not the way it's supposed to be. It's not the way that God designed it. Death is not natural. And that is good for me to hear, because when I grew up, I always thought that death was just part of life. People just die. And I kind of overcame my fear of death because I was like, it's going to happen to everyone, so might as well not be afraid of it. But the point the preacher is saying is, it's not natural. It's unnatural. It's inhumane. It's an attack against God's image. That is what he's trying to communicate. Also, in verses 4 through 6, he's pointing out the kind of humor in death and the humor in living, and he's kind of poking fun of a purposeful life. He talks about how if you're dead, you've perished, your memory is gone, you will be forgotten, you share no more in anything that is done under the sun, that's done here on earth. You're gone. Goodbye. You've vanished like a vapor in the wind, right? Everyone that dies will be forgotten. And he plays with this a little bit when he says, but there is hope. And he kind of gives you for a second, think, oh, he's going to give me something really hopeful to cling on and to hang my hat on. But he kind of pokes fun by saying, the hope is for the living is that they know that they're going to die. And that dead people don't know because they're not thinking they're dead. And so he pokes fun at life a little bit by saying, you're alive, good for you. You at least know you're going to die. The dead don't know anything. So what are you going to do about it? How are you going to live? See, one thing that we get clear from 1 through 6 verses is that death is certain. It's guaranteed. It's going to happen. It's inevitable and it's coming. But also, God's hand is present. It's there. Whether you are good or bad, God has you in his hand. And whether you experience love or hate, look back at verse 1, it says, love or hate, we don't know. Man doesn't know what God is going to offer to them. But what we do know for certain is that we are in God's hand. We're right there, held in his hand. David in Psalm 139 writes this beautiful psalm. And I want to read it to you. I want to read you verse 16, and we'll go back to this in the second point. But here's verse 16. You don't need to turn there. I'll read it to you. Psalm 139, 16. Your eyes saw my unformed substance. In your book were written, every one of them, the days that were formed for me, when as yet there was none of them. David is acknowledging God's control over his life, his ownership, acknowledging that God owns him, that God has his hand on his life, that he is in God's hand, in his power and authority. Because God knows since before you were born, every single day of your life, up to your very last. My grandma, a year ago, on November 2nd, 2015, shared her testimony at my home church in Orlando, Florida. And she shared this testimony of 77 years of life. And she went through every stage of her life, from a little girl all the way up to what we didn't know was her last stage at the time. But in each stage, she kept hammering this point down over and over again. And I just listened to it a few days ago, and she kept saying, God owns it all. And then she went on to her adulthood stage. And then at the end of it, she said, God owns it all. And here's this lady at 76 years old looking back on her whole life and just saying, God has complete control and ownership of me. There was nothing that was my own. It was all him. Everything that I had, everything that was taken from me, it was all on God. God owns it all. From start to finish. Whatever you have been dealt today in your life, God owns it. Whatever you have in your life today, God owns it. Now, I know that there may be some of you sitting here right now thinking, come on, man, please, you got to be kidding me. God does not have control. Have you not looked outside? Have you not seen the gunfires? Have you not seen the people dying? Have you not seen the wars? And even talking about myself, have you not seen that my parents have gotten a divorce or that my dad died when I was young? Have you not seen that? Have you not seen that my girlfriend broke up with me? And if you are thinking these things, like God can't be in control if these bad things are happening to me, I want you to know that you're not alone and that I'm sorry that that has happened to you. But I must remind you in a gentle and loving way that God has never promised us an easy life this side of sin. I can tell you, though, and I can label it for you, that what has happened to you is wrong and not the way it's supposed to be. That the death you have experienced and the sin you have experienced in your life is not natural. It was not given and designed by God, but was rather a result of rebellion against him by you and I. You see, God knows how you feel. God gave his son, Jesus, to die. He knows what it's like to lose a child. He knows what it's like to experience death. And not only that, Jesus, God's Son, walked on earth. His dad died at a young age, his earthly dad. Lazarus died, John the Baptist died, and he himself died on a cross. I mean, we're talking about God and Jesus who really fully understand this concept of dying, actually, and have experienced it and have tasted it themselves. They know where you have been, and they know where you are going, and they have felt it, and they have experienced it themselves. Jesus walked through the seasons of life just like you and I. And I want you to know that Jesus and God know how you feel, and have been where you have been. You can trust them. You can trust God. My second point is that you can live with joy because God gives you life. Let's look at verses 7 through 10, and I'm going to read them to you. Go eat your bread with joy and drink your wine with a merry heart, for God has already approved what you do. Let your garments be always white. Let not oil be lacking on your head. Enjoy life with the wife whom you love all the days of your vain life that he has given you under the sun, because that is your portion in life, and in your toil at which you toil under the sun. Whatever your hand finds, so do it with your might. For there is no work or thought or knowledge or wisdom in Sheol to which you are going. The preacher, it's almost laughable a little bit at what he does here. He takes you through a very depressing verses 1 through 6 of like, you're gonna die, you're all gonna die, like see you later, like give up. But then he says these words, it's unbelievable to me. He says, go eat and drink with joy and be merry. Go love your wife. Go love the people in your life and your relationships. Go to work and work hard. I mean, I almost feel like after I read verses 1 through 6, I'm like, all right, throw in the towel. I'm going on a Netflix binge for the next 24 hours. I'm not stopping, okay? Like that, I mean, I read verses 1 through, that's where I'm at. I read most of Ecclesiastes, and that's where I'm at. But he puts these sections in throughout Ecclesiastes where he presses in on this weird tension that life is still kind of good, right? That a good, cold Coca-Cola on a Saturday after playing football in the park is so good. I mean, I'm telling you, I've done it. It's really good. So you see, he says eat and drink. And when I think about that now, and I think about my grandma, I would give anything to have one more Chick-fil-A meal with her. I mean, that's what we used to do. We used to go to Chick-fil-A on Wednesdays. And every Wednesday night, we would go to Chick-fil-A before my youth group. And she would take me there. I could get whatever I wanted, milkshake to drink, large fry. Oh, man. I would give anything just to eat one more meal with her. And it's so, I look back and I wish that I soaked those in more. I wish that I took joy in those more. I wish that I enjoyed it more. Because I look back and I go, I was just doing that for the free meal. I was just doing that just to get a milkshake. I didn't really care of taking part in that with my grandma. You see, we are alive right now, and I think that's what the preacher's getting at. You are breathing this very second. So enjoy the next meal you have with the people you have with you. Soak it in. Say things that you wish you should have said a long time ago, that you want them to know that when you're gone, for them to know. Say things like that to people in your conversations. Don't let your conversations end without you saying something to them that at least for some reason impacts them and shows them your appreciation and your joy of that relationship. And the preacher talks about go be and enjoy the wife whom you love. I mean, he's pushing right back in on this garden imagery, right? You have food. I mean, the Lord provides trees for Adam and Eve to eat from, all right? You have this imagery of a wife here, and Adam has provided a companion and a relationship right here, right? You have work, and Adam's given responsibility to do work, and God presses in on this wife. I mean, the preacher presses in on this wife relationship, and presses in on this work relationship, and presses in on this need for food, right? And he presses in on all these good echoes of Eden, like Jaron Barnes likes to say. These echoes that are good, that are here present today, that are still around from the time of the Garden of Eden. It's relationships, it's food, it's work, it's purpose. They're still here. But yes, they are a little twisted because of our sin. I mean, things are a little twisted and messed up and broken. And when you get messy people, getting around messy people and doing things, it just keeps on getting messier. But I think the preacher's pushing in. Don't be afraid of the mess. Don't be afraid of death. Continue to live your life. And I want to draw your attention to verse 9, because this is a slight hint of hope that he drops in there. Verse 9 says, all the days of your vain life that he has given you. God has given you life. God has given you food to eat. God has given you people to love. God has given you work to do. You didn't deserve these things. They were given to you. You didn't even deserve to come into existence. I mean, think about it. Raise your hand if you first made the choice to be born. I mean, that had nothing to do with you. All of a sudden, you came into existence and were brought forth. That is grace. You did not earn it, but yet you are breathing here today. On August 24th, 2016, my wife wakes me up, and I'm sleeping in. I'm enjoying, a little bit of a break from classes. It was my day off, and she comes in, and she jumps on the bed, and she says, look at this, look at this, look at this. And I'm sitting there in the bed, and I'm like, I'm blind as a bat for one. I wear contacts and glasses, and I can't see anything. And one, I'm not a morning person, and I hate being woken up. So I wake up, and I'm like, all right, what's going on? Like, why are you this better be good. And I look, and she's like, look, look, look. And I'm like, I can't see anything. And I get closer up to it, and she's holding this little stick. And on it was this line that said that she was pregnant. I'm just waking up in the morning this day, and I'm just overwhelmed by the fact that there's this little life form being knitted together in my wife's womb. That's being brought forth into creation. And this little life form and this little existence didn't do anything to deserve to come into this world, but was given life and given existence because God gives life. I'm going to read to you Psalm 139, 13 through 15, and this is the 2 verses before 16. And this is the Psalm of David, and he says this, for you formed my inward parts. You knitted me together in my mother's womb. I praise you, for I'm fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works. My soul knows it very well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was being made in secret, intricately woven in the depths of the earth. My baby did nothing to earn life, but yet God has chosen to give it life. I have done nothing to earn life, but yet God has chosen to give me life. You have done nothing, but yet you are alive. God has graciously given us life. And now, I get it. Some of us are born into some awful situations, into poverty. Some of us are born into parents that are divorced. Some of us are born to no parents at all. Some of us are born poor. Some of us are born with the opportunity for education, and some of us are not. Some of you have been born into awesome families with awesome parents. But we cannot control where God places us and where God positions us. But we can know that we are in His hands. We can know that He has power and control over all things, over our lives. And we can know that our life is a gift, and that the very breath that we are taking is undeserved, but given to us. That the very meal that we're going to eat is undeserved, but given to us. That the very people that at least sometimes say, I love you to you, is a gift and given to you. We do not have the freedom to choose our lot, what has been given to us, our circumstances. and to choose to be born today, or was it 100 years ago or 100 years from now? We don't have those choices. But what we do have a choice about is how we live and how we're going to live. My question to you is, how do you live? Do you live through the daily, mundane, ordinary moments of life with joy? Now, I'm not talking about the fake kind of joy, the kind of joy where people just act like everything's okay and everything's all right. I'm talking about this real kind of joy that hits in the heart, that understands this reality, that understands this tension that the preacher is talking about between death and a good life. And the contradiction of those two things, that is somewhat contemplating and somewhat wrestling through that. I'm talking about a kind of joy that is real and honest. The man with his heart knows things are not the way it's supposed to be. They understand that. But at the same time, they know that God's in control, and they know that God still gives life, and they commune with God in Jesus. This man is aware of the reality of his inevitable death, but yet still chooses to eat, drink, marry, have relationships, work, and live because God has him in his hand. And God has given him life. I'm talking about a man kind of like Jesus, who knew very well what was coming his way, death on a cross, yet still chose to live on earth and to eat food and to drink and to make relationships and to disciple and to go forward with his life and to enjoy it. This man, Jesus, died on a cross, a cruel death at a young age, but God gave him life and resurrected him from the grave. And Jesus, death was defeated. Death had lost its sting. God, through Jesus, has now given life to all who believe in him. Not only has God given you life now, but God has promised you life after death. This is the underlying hope of Ecclesiastes 9. The preacher has positioned his readers into a state of despair and depression, and he has positioned us in this position right now. There's no hope for us. For us, as human beings, in and of ourselves, we can't do anything. We have no control. There's a deep need for a miracle, a need for a Savior. And it comes, and it is known, and it is found in Jesus. Since the beginning of time, God has been a life giver, and God has been in control. He created Adam from dust and breathed life into him, and provided for all his needs in the Garden of Eden by giving him food, a companion, and work. In other words, he gave him purpose and responsibility. But Adam's disobedience opposed God and ushered in sin. No longer was food provided, and no longer was companionship guaranteed, and no longer was work blessed, but rather mankind from then on would have to struggle to eat, to make friends, to work. Everything was cursed, and death had arrived onto the scene, intruding it, making our God-given lives meaningless. Or so it appears. This is where we're at in Ecclesiastes 9. This is where we sit. So take moments throughout your day to enjoy what has been given to you by God. In the Garden of Eden, God gave Adam these things, food, drink, and companionship, work, and life, for him to enjoy. And they are still here on earth for us to enjoy. But it all comes with much more struggle due to our sin. But despite this, we should live with joy, not fear and death, because God holds us in his hand, because God gives us life. So each moment, each meal, each conversation, take the time. Take the time to soak it in, to enjoy it. I would like to conclude by reading you a letter from my grandma, Panna, that she wrote a month before she died. This is after she visited the hospital and came back to her house. She had a minor stroke, so she went in, and now she's coming back, and she's typing this up Monday morning at 10 o'clock. Dear family, it is 10 o'clock, Monday morning, and I feel like I have been in a fog, waiting for the fog to lift. And I see which way to go. That must seem to be a strange description of the last 10 days, but that is the way I have felt. I haven't known what to say. I've said very little to everyone. I have done absolutely nothing. But most significantly, I have felt your prayers and everyone's caring words. I know that I am loved. God and I have had some very good talks recently, and I've been ready to join him and Kent, my husband, in heaven. But clearly he has said, not yet. Whew! Exclamation mark. I've said it. I believe it. Now I must get up, walk out of the fog, and walk the walk God has called me to. This I must do whether my heart heals or not, whether I collapse walking or not. This has not been easy for me. I have fears of what if? Question mark. Pray for courage and bravery. God is not finished with me yet. Faith must override fear. I must pick up the full armor of God and get my marching papers. I must be strong. So be encouraged, I am. Still love me, still pray for me. There are lots of challenges. Exclamation mark, exclamation mark. I am a blessed lady to have such a loving family. And a special thank you to Scott, my son, who went with me through the fog. He did not speak, he just went with me. Sometimes not speaking, just being with you is better. That is what God does. That is what Chessie, my cat, does. That is what I am learning. I'm ready to talk, email, text, or whatever. I am back! Exclamation mark. Love, Hannah. Live with joy. God holds you in his hands, and God gives you life. Amen. Thank you.